document to Americans because it was the document that proclaimed independence from England. And at that time, as you know, England was the owner of and the controller of the 13 colonies, which were under British control. And around 1770, they began to rebel against the British. And that came down to outright war in 1775. And in 1776, Thomas Jefferson and others sat down to put their feelings and their philosophy about the revolution in writing. And that became the Declaration of Independence, where these colonies do declare their independence and all allegiance to the British Crown. In some ways, it was a propaganda document because there were arguments that the document should go all the way to proclaim against slavery as well, since it talked about the equality and the fraternity of man and man's right to freedom and so on as an individual. But the language was changed at the last minute to not anger those colonies that depended heavily upon slavery, especially Virginia and North Carolina and South Carolina and the colony of Georgia and South Carolina, which are the southern colonies at that time, as well as Maryland had heavy slaveholding during that period of time. Thomas Jefferson himself, called the author of the Declaration of Independence, was a large slave owner, and he was from Virginia, of course. And so they watered the language down that all men are endowed with the unalienable rights, you know. Really, it was much stronger than that. But they compromised, and if you read the Declaration of Independence, it sort of lays the blame of slavery upon Britain and says, you know, that Britain is responsible for transporting all these alien persons from Africa, you know, over to North American continent. But nevertheless, the language could not be changed in such a way as to deny that all men had the right to freedom and equality. However, as you know, slavery continued to exist in the 13 colonies, and that, of course, was a contradiction of the document itself. Now, as you know, we beat the British in 1780, and for all practical purposes, the Revolutionary War was over. It wasn't until 3 years later, 1783, that the Treaty of Paris was signed. And that treaty between the British and the 13 colonies did give them independence and also gave them land all the way to the Mississippi River that had been under the British. And so they have their independence. As a result of that, many of the colonies were cognizant of the contradiction and the hypocrisy of the Declaration that they were not living up to. And so Massachusetts in 1780 outright abolished slavery. And then so did New Jersey and New York and some of the other northern colonies. But the southern colonies did pass some emancipation acts allowing masters to emancipate a slave if they wished, but not the state itself. And as a result, slavery continued right on up until we got rid of it with the bloody Civil War, 1861 to 1865.
And so, Dr. Lovett, and I think you mentioned slavery in connection with the Declaration of Independence on several occasions. Let's talk about, and of course we're getting ready, I would imagine, within the next minute or so for our first commercial break. But let's deal with the issue of slavery in the colonies that was impacted. Give us some numbers in reference to this as a group of individuals and why this group would be of some concern to the Constitution.
Well, during the Revolutionary War period of our history, and we call that period, you know, from about 1775 up until the time that we write the Constitution and implement the Constitution in 1789, the one that we live under now. And from 1789 up until about 1830, we call that the New Nation period, when we were building a nation as a result of that Constitution. And at that time, during the Revolutionary War period, African Americans, believe it or not, were about 1 out of every 4 persons in the 13 colonies. By 1790, they are still about 1 of every 4 persons in the colonies, and 90% of them are slaves. The northern states are passing acts to gradually get rid of slavery, gradual abolition acts as we call them. The southern colonies are doing a little bit, but then along comes the cotton gin, along comes the demand for textiles in Europe,
okay,
and slavery explodes in the South.
Let me interrupt here for this short commercial break, after which we'll come back and we'll allow you to continue that conversation.